Welcome everybody back to a new series I'm calling The Gaming Graveyard, where we're going to be talking about the humiliating failures in the gaming industry. Today we're covering Anthem. After the failure of Mass Effect Andromeda, this was the next big thing from Bioware. This was basically the game that everybody wanted to see Bioware bounce back from, with EA now breathing down their back. This was simply going to have to be one of their best titles yet. Unfortunately, as history would prove, it would not be one of their best titles, and actually it wouldn't even be the next big thing, nor would it really compete with any big titles in the same release window. But why did BioWare fail so miserably at meeting the high expectations that their fans had for their titles? Let's dive into the pretty quick and painful development of Anthem. Anthem at the beginning of its life was very complicated. How complicated, you might be asking? Well, the best way to show you is a quote from General Manager Casey Hudson, where he's going to describe the early days of Anthem. We did 20 or 30 different originals during the first pass. We all go off and you're inspired by something. And you're, hey, I think I know how everything should be, and you write it all out and you pitch it. It's really interesting because you get a value system around what you like and what feels right. But when you start to say, well, we liked this one part of this pitch, but the rest of it didn't really work. But we like this other thing, and the two sit really nicely together. That was the process we used to get off the blank page. Now, after they finally got a feel for what they wanted Anthem to be, they codenamed the game Code Dylan. Yes, named after the musician Bob Dylan. Now, in these early days of development, the game was very much so led and influenced heavily by Casey Hudson. However, while Anthem was still in early development, Casey Hudson announced his departure from BioWare in August 7th of 2014. Now, that's not great, obviously. Losing somebody so influential so early in development is always going to hurt a project. However, this was Anthem's A team. This was their number one team. Meanwhile, another project named Mass Effect Andromeda had begun development by their B studio, Bioware Montreal. Now, at this point in BioWare's history, they were split between these two studios. There was the team in Edmonton and the B studio in Montreal. Now, to say these two studios were not getting along would be a massive understatement. Actually, I don't think these studios ever truly seen eye to eye on a single topic. Now, just for an example, one of these pretty huge disagreements happened to be with Mass Effect Andromeda, and basically the entire existence of Mass Effect Andromeda. Bioware Montreal wanted the game to be very much so like a Mass Effect game, but with procedural generation, planet visiting, all that good stuff, sort of like Starfield. If you want to know a more recent game, think Starfield. That was their vision, pretty much. Now, despite this probably being a really cool idea, Bioware Edmonton felt like this wasn't a strong enough approach and felt like, well, Montreal was mishandling the project. In return for this opinion, Montreal felt like, well, simply they were being sabotaged by the A studio at Edmonton. This was not great, and now Montreal was starting to see Edmonton as more of a rival than a fellow studio. This was the beginning of the BioWare Civil War. Now, after Casey Hudson's leaving, they obviously found a replacement for him, got new management, and trudged along. Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem have now had months of development pumped into them. These two projects have a tough realization, however. After months of work, they were not going well. Both projects were hitting serious bumps in the road, and especially Andromeda, which had to be out sooner than Anthem, so that was more worrisome for the team. Now, you might be asking, why are these games going so poorly compared to other BioWare projects? There's one simple answer for that. Everybody hates BioWare. Now, obviously, fans don't. However, it seems, well, employees were not enjoying their jobs at all. How many people are leaving the company, you might be asking, around this time? Well, let's run through it. In July of 2009, Trent Oster, co-founder of BioWare, announced his leaving of the company to found Beamdog. Then in August of 2009, Brent Nowles announced his leaving of BioWare and joined Beamdog in 2015. And finally, the final person to leave BioWare in 2009 would be Kevin Martins, who left the company at some point in 2009. I couldn't find a date for it. He would later work for Blizzard. Now you might be saying, that's not that bad. It's a couple high staffers, but they can replace them and the game shouldn't really be affected that much. Oh wait, I'm not fucking done. In September 18th of 2012, Ramazaka and Greg Zestuk, I tried my best, I'm sorry for that mispronunciation, left the company. Obviously, that wasn't great either. Then, Casey Hudson announces, as we previously stated, he would be leaving the company August of 2014. David Geider announced he would be leaving. Aaron Flint announced his leaving in July 2017. Mike Laidlaw announced his exit in October of 2017. Stephen Gilmore announced his exit of October 2017. Drew Garsby announced he would be leaving February of 2012. James Olin announced he would be leaving in July of 2018. Jax LeBran announced his leaving in September of 2018. Fernando Mello announced his leaving in August 2019. Oh my god. To say the least, the company was on fire. It was bleeding staffers like there was no tomorrow. Now, I'm sorry for that very quick and very rushed rundown, but that is the easiest way for me to convey it because, oh my god, I mean, again, the company was bleeding. The people they had during their golden years were effectively gone, and not to tear down the replacements, but yeah, they were probably less than ideal replacements. So that is why Bioware's development of Anthem and Mass Effect was going so badly. None of the core staffers from their previous titles were there, so they were basically a brand new studio at this point. From 2014 to 2017, the game basically never really left pre-production. Anthem was always restarting, it was always looking to change. The biggest core idea during this time that consistently kept getting cut was flying. Yes, the only interesting thing of Anthem at launch was consistently cut from the game. What also caused a lot of problems during development was the Frostbite engine, which was, I mean, let's be honest here, not the best engine ever made if it's not an FPS game. You might be saying, yeah, Anthem's an FPS game, but it was also supposed to be an RPG at the same time, and Frostbite did not have the capabilities to really make a game like that. The features Bioware was trying to add, the engine was just not made to handle. So from 2014 to 2017, Anthem really wasn't a game. Internally, the studio wasn't even wanting to call it Anthem. It was supposed to be called Beyond, but due to trademark troubles, it was eventually changed to their backup plan, Anthem. Despite Anthem really never existing as a full-fledged game internally, it was still revealed at E3 2017. The trailer that was shown was stunning, people. It looked solid, it didn't look bad, and the suits looked pretty cool. You know, people were willing to give it a chance. But there was one small problem with the trailer. The trailer wasn't even playable. It was basically a cinematic and nothing more. Basically, internally, Bioware was now just mimicking what the trailer showed and trying to build a game from that. Bioware was now copying and trying to figure it all out as they went. Nonetheless, the game being a live service title still brought some concerns to fans who at this point were not necessarily embracing the new change from them. In a hope to maybe alleviate some concerns, Mike Gamble, lead producer on Anthem at the time, said at PAX West 2017, "It's a hard problem to solve. It's like, how do you do a multiplayer game that has cooperative at its heart, but also still be able to tell a good story? And you know, I don't think anyone actually has nailed it yet. I think we probably have a pretty good shot at coming out of the gates and being able to do it, but it takes intentional design from the very beginning to split out. Okay, this is how you're going to do your missions, and this is how you're going to do your character building." Now, in my opinion, and pretty much I think a lot of people's opinions at the time, this quote was perfect. When you're making a game and people are questioning you, it's kind of a smart decision to throw your competition under the bus and saying, we're not going to be like those guys. Now, after E3, Casey Hudson announced he was returning to Bioware to work on Anthem. Now, Casey Hudson returning for many could have been seen as a very good thing, but now we kind of look back at it and realize it was a bad thing. Why was it a bad thing? Well, Casey Hudson hasn't seen this game in 3 years. It now had to be a live service title. It basically had nothing done on it, like, at all, and it was basically just a vertical slice for tutorial purposes only. Yeah, Casey Hudson and the guys had a lot of work to do, and if Casey Hudson was going to be caught up, it was going to take some time. Now, something that also didn't help the fact that Anthem hardly existed was the fact that Mass Effect Andromeda, the other game that the studio had been working on, was a massive failure. This meant even more pressure was being placed on Anthem. Even more pressure the game was simply never going to handle. The next few years of development from 2017 to around 2018 was painfully slow for Bioware. I mean, there's no doubt that Bioware was struggling through this phase. Although we don't technically have any very in-depth details about the development cycle internally, there is no doubt in my mind that BioWare was crunching their ass off to get this game to launch. Now, the initial release date for Anthem was late 2018, which I'm assuming internally for the devs must have been some sick joke, because there was no way the game was making that date. Now, on January 30th, 2018, EA did announce that the game would be pushed back. Instead of releasing late 2018, it will now release February 22nd, 2019, which for the devs was probably seen still as some sort of sick, cruel joke. Now, what did EA have to say about this delay? Well, they had to say basically nothing, with the CFO simply stating, "It's not a delay." If it wasn't a delay, then what was it, you might be asking? Well, the CFO had an answer for that. They seen it as more of an opportunity to give Anthem a chance to grow, to give Anthem a better chance and a better release window, so it doesn't have to face such a crowded market. Now, obviously, our current knowledge, that was absolute bullshit, but at the time, people didn't have a reason not to believe him. Obviously, except for the fact that he works for EA. Now, BioWare was obviously begging for delays, but EA was adamant the game had to make the February 22nd, 2019 release date. The refusal to delay the game was simply because EA wanted it to meet their fiscal year target. Now, while Anthem continued to struggle to be a successful game internally, BioWare didn't give up hope though. They kept their ear to the ground, kept really trying to figure out what people wanted from the looter shooter genre. Although at this point, many had already accepted that Anthem's release date was not about adding new things that the looter shooter genre needed, but it was instead going to be used as time to just get the game to work properly. Now, Anthem did have a way for you to play the game early. Was this a smart move? Probably not, but hey. Oh well. If you bought the VIP pass, you would get access to the game early. The early access would begin on February 15th, 2019. And to nobody's surprise, it was an absolute disaster. It was not a very good early access at all for the studio. If anything, it kind of killed any momentum Anthem would have even had going into launch. What were some of the problems that made the Anthem early access so bad, I hear you begging to know? Well, here's a few. The infinite loading bug, which was very prevalent, would just not let you load into the game. The servers were constantly crashing and weren't very good. However, EA and BioWare insisted that this was not because they were underprepared for the large number of players. Although, let's be honest here, that's the only reason the servers would crash. There was so much more than just those two problems. However, I don't want to continue to cover every problem because there was a lot. Those were the two most prevalent issues. The only other thing I will cover about the early access period of Anthem is this, as I will call it, the chart. The chart EA released to show you how to play Anthem, when you should play it, etc., etc. It's on your screen now, feel free to pause and read it. Whoever made this chart was not very smart. This was a bad idea from start to finish. When you're releasing a chart that is this complicated for how to just play your game, you may have fucked it up a little bit. Nonetheless, this chart went through 50 people at EA, and pretty much all of them had to approve it in order for this to get pushed out the door. So yeah, they must have been desperate at this point to get people to continue to play Anthem. Despite the problems during the early access period, Anthem would still be released February 22nd, 2019. It had mixed reviews at launch, critics and fans didn't seem to love the game, and the stigma around EA definitely did not help. EA wasn't necessarily at the pinnacle of their peak, and EA by this point had now released Mass Effect Andromeda and Star Wars Battlefront 2, the latter being the most controversial game they have ever released. I'm not going to be covering everything that happened after launch because it's just too many things and it's going to make this video too long. However, I'll sum it up as much as possible. After the launch of Anthem, the game sucked. That was obvious, so Bioware announced they were committing to making the game better. They made a lot of bad updates, and they basically abandoned the game for a couple of months. They then announced that they were going to be rebuilding the game from the ground up. This went pretty much nowhere. Despite this being a really good idea and would have gotten fans kind of back on the Bioware ship if it was done well, it was abandoned. The simple fact was nobody wanted to play Anthem, the game was forgotten, and EA had moved on. What was the aftermath of Anthem? Well, by this point, EA is still rich. Bioware is working on Dragon Age Valguard, which is already being seen as a controversial game and has been reworked, redone in so many different ways internally before the game has even launched. The actual development of Valguard seems to be just as rocky as their previous titles. Ultimately, Bioware is on the rocks. After the failure of their past two titles, now the struggles with their third. If Dragon Age Valguard is not a smash hit, Bioware will cease to exist immediately. EA has done it before, and they will do it again. So that was the long ride of Anthem. Although the actual development was not that long, it had a history that needed to be covered. I hope you enjoyed. I will be releasing hopefully these every 2 weeks at the latest, and I really hope you guys enjoy these so I can do more in the future. I put a lot of time in this one and it might not show, but I have a lot going on, so this is basically being done in my free time. I'll leave any links and websites I've used for information in the description below. And that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed the first episode of the Gaming Graveyard, and I will be releasing again these hopefully every 2 weeks. If you want to nominate the next video that will join the graveyard next to Anthem, just simply leave a comment below and I will pick my favorite.